Welcome, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. On today's show, we'll discuss U.S. President Donald Trump's contentious relationship with the media. The CNN's Jim Acosta had his White House access revoked by Trump for daring to question him during a press conference. Those credentials have now been, on orders, restored by a U.S. district judge. Let's first watch the video of the press conference in question.
Because I consider it an invasion. You and I have a difference of opinion.
But do you think that you demonized immigrants in this election
No, not
to
at all.
try to keep...
I want them to come into the country, but they have to come in legally. You know, they have to come in, Jim, through a process. I want it to be a process. And I want people to come in, and we need the people.
Your campaign...
Wait. You know why we need the people, don't you? Because we have hundreds of companies moving in. We need the people.
But your campaign had an ad showing migrants climbing over walls and so on.
Well, that's true.
But
they weren't actors.
They're not going to be doing that.
They weren't actors. Well, no, it's true. Do you think they were actors? They weren't actors. They didn't come from Hollywood. I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN.
All right.
And if you did it well, your ratings
Let
would
me
be
ask,
much better.
if I may ask one other question. Mr. President, if I may ask
Peter,
one other
go ahead.
question. Are you worried?
That's enough. That's enough.
Mr. President, I was going to ask one other... The other folks have
That's
had...
enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr. President,
That's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other
Peter,
question,
let's
if
go.
I may ask, on the Russia investigation. Are you concerned that you may have
I'm not concerned
indictments-
about anything with
that you
the
may have
Russian
indictments coming
investigation
down?
because it's a hoax.
Are you-
That's enough. Put down the mic.
Mr. President, are you worried about indictments coming down in this investigation?
Mr. President.
I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN. Go ahead.
I think that's unfair.
You're a very rude person. The way you treat Sarah Huckabee is horrible. And the way you treat other people are horrible. You shouldn't treat people that way. Go ahead.
All right, well, that was a press conference, as I mentioned in question, and as I described it earlier as well. To discuss that and, of course, all the related issues that come up with this, we're joined now by Mazhar Abbas, who is a senior journalist, and he's joining us now on the line. Mazhar, thank you very much for joining us here on The Scope. I wonder, Mazhar, I'm sure you've, of course, watched that video and you've heard about the ensuing fallout. What did you make of that entire episode at the White House?
Thank you very much. This is something new which the American media has experienced, over the years, particularly after Donald Trump's presidency. But this is for the first time that a correspondent has been, basically, not only humiliated but also been sacked from White House. But recently he got an interim relief from the American court.
Yeah.
But in the past there have been instances in which the fake news has dominated the world media. If you remember, by far the biggest fake news which struck me was the weapon of mass destruction, on which the entire country was attacked. The Iraqi phenomena. And in the end, not only one of the leading American newspapers apologized for being used, but also the other media also felt that the American administration had basically used the weapon of mass destruction, and which was in the end turned out to be a fake news. But in Donald Trump's era, he has been humiliating, insulting, particularly CNN and one or two other newspapers, and calling a journalist a fake journalist or a rude or terrible person. These kind of expressions we had experience in the past in the other countries, but not in U.S. So this is for the first time the American media has experienced such a case, and that is why he went to the court, and the CNN challenged the very, the cancellation of the past credentials of the journalists, and also they have challenged that the American president has not only violated the First Amendment, but they are also using the Fifth Amendment, which means that which relates to the legal process. So,
Right.
although he has got the interim relief, But I don't think that the relationship between the U.S. President Trump and the CNN will improve with the passage of time. I think he has been accusing CNN since he was first elected as president, and basically, he accused CNN and some other newspaper for allegedly manipulating during his election campaign, and launching a campaign against him. And that is why when he was first elected, in his very first press conference also, he accused some of the American media. And since then, we have been hearing from him calling a selective brand of journalists as fake journalists, fake news. And in the same press conference in which this incident happened, he also accused one of the black journalists, a female journalist, calling her question as racist.
Yeah.
So these kind of expressions coming from the person who is the most powerful president of the most powerful country, it's really amazing.
So if I may come in, Mazhar, if you allow me, because there's a number of issues that come up with this, don't they? Because even, in fact, in this case, Trump's, what many would call favorite channel, Fox News, in fact, supported Jim Acosta of CNN in this specific case. They supported the fact that he was standing against the revocation of his press credentials to the White House. So when even Donald Trump's favorite channel comes out and says this is an attack on the free press in the United States, do you agree with that? Do you think that this is Donald Trump who wants to show the press that he wants limits placed on them?
Yes, definitely the Fox News and even some other newspapers, media organizations also supported CNN on this very point, and they backed CNN, the legal position they have taken, and they have also supported CNN when they decided to sue the American president. These are all positive developments, and that is what something missing within the American media over the past 2 years, because Donald Trump in the past also had accused journalists. In the past also he has insulted some of the journalists, but we haven't seen such kind of a unity among the American journalists or among the American media.
Right.
Even in this very press conference, there was no one who stood and protested the way the president addressed the journalists. So that kind of a unity would always help not only the American media, the world over. This kind of a unity was missing in the American media and the other media in Pakistan. In the past, we had witnessed such kind of a conversation and such kind of an attack on the media verbally from the president and from the prime minister. If I can recall, it's in one of the incidents in 1979, if I am not mistaken, General Zia, who was the military dictator, had directly accused media, and if I'm not wrong, he even threatened the journalists and the media that if he closed down all the newspapers and hanged few of the journalists, no newspaper will speak in support of them. But at that very point, one of the journalists, who was the former president of the PFUJ, Mr. Nisar Usmani, stood and he confronted the president, he challenged the president, and he said that death is something which is not in the hand of anyone. And in the past, journalists in Pakistan have always protested and went to prison, faced lashes, military courts, and all kind of these pressures. But that is not, one was not expecting this kind of a attitude from a civilized world or from the world which often claim to be the most free world and has the freedom of the expression and freedom of the press. But in Pakistan, in the past, we have seen now the American media experiences in Donald Trump's era, at least, something which they have never experienced in the past.
So Mazhar, I'm wondering though, because the Donald Trump administration would argue that, and as Donald Trump has already, and I'm sure many other leaders around the world would argue that being journalists, you and I being journalists, we realize that there's a lot of responsibility on our shoulders, isn't there, in how we report and in how we ask questions as well. So do you think that in this case, Donald Trump may have a point when it comes to decorum and etiquette of asking questions from any president or any world leader?
Yes, you can. I mean, you can not only contradict and you can not only challenge the news item. You can not only you can even challenge the credential of the journalist. And but there is always a way. You can't insult someone. You can't use expressions like you are a terrible person. You can't use an expression like you are fake. You can't use expressions like that CNN is fake. Now, if you have problem with the CNN, if you have problem with any other newspaper, you can always sue the newspapers and defamation laws in United States and in other Western countries are pretty strong.
Yeah.
So if Trump or any other president or any other government official has problem with the media and media at times acts very irresponsibility, there's no doubt about it. I just quoted a very important and significant instance
Yes.
about the weapon of mass destruction. Now, this story of weapon of mass destruction was not a fake story; it was planted.
Yeah.
There's a difference between a story being fake and
Yeah.
a story being planted. So, in the past, it did happen, and in war situation, we always know that truth is the first casualty.
Yeah.
But when Donald Trump has problem with the CNN, he can always, or his administration can always come out with a solid report against CNN, accuse CNN in the court of law
Yeah.
that there is a systematic campaign against him or for that matter against his government, and can always go to the court of law. But calling someone, can a journalist call president, you are rude, you are terrible, you are fake? No.
Yeah.
The journalist is not supposed to address any person in with such an expression. And same stands for the president or for anyone else. So
Yeah.
contradicting a journalist or denying his story is something, and humiliating him in front of say about 150 journalists is something else.
So Mazhar, I wonder, if I may just ask you bluntly, from what you have observed of the media's reporting on Donald Trump as a whole, ever since he was candidate, do you think that the media has been fair to him? Because, Donald Trump regularly says the media is being unfair, regardless of the fact, and you're correct, of course, that Donald Trump can react in a much better fashion. That, of course, I agree with you on that argument. But on the separate argument of whether the media is treating him fairly or not, because sometimes it does seem like, doesn't it, Mazhar, that the likes of CNN and others possibly just concentrate on, if I may use the term, bashing Trump a lot.
You see, there is always, particularly during the American elections, newspapers in the past, and I believe in the last election also, they officially take positions. They officially take position that they will be supporting Democrats, they will be supporting Republicans, and there's nothing wrong in it if you officially announce that in this election you'll be backing. Although I personally don't believe on this theory.
Yeah.
I personally believe that a journalist has to be objective, if not neutral. You have to be objective if you're not even neutral. So you have to balance your story. You can't comment on certain news item without attribution or without taking the reaction or the version of the other party. Now, in the basic difference between Trump and CNN, I believe started during the American election, the last American election, not the midterm election,
Yeah.
and in which Donald Trump or his party basically believed that the CNN was not fair to them. I mean, it could be possible. I mean, I haven't watched all the stories
Yeah.
during the election or even after that.
Yeah.
So it could be possible that CNN or any other, for that matter, newspapers have been biased against Trump. But there are also newspapers and channels who might be favoring Donald Trump, not basically on fair reporting. You know, you can be biased in support of someone, you
Yeah.
can be biased against someone.
Yeah.
So when it comes to be biased, so Donald Trump has to differentiate between the pro and anti-government position.
Right.
You have to take a very objective position. So a lot of media in Pakistan also, or journalists generally, believe that during the last election there have been biased reporting. During the last election there have been some biased coverage.
Right.
But then in the past, it is nothing new. Even in the past, the New York Times or Washington Post,
Yeah.
Wall Street Journal, or for that matter, Fox News and CNN. In the past also, they have taken the position. So what was missing in the last election perhaps was CNN's too much bias against a person, not against the party.
Okay. All right, Mazhar, we do, of course, appreciate you taking your time as to join us here on The Scope, of course, and sharing your thoughts with us on this very important subject, especially for journalists like you and I. We'll go for a short break, but just before that, I wanted to just sum up one thing which Mazhar there mentioned, that is the word objectivity. That is something that all journalists, of course, should aim for. That's something that is up for debate, of course, about CNN and Jim Acosta at this stage. We'll discuss more of that after this short break. Welcome back. We're in The Scope. I'm Waqar Rizvi. We're continuing our discussion about the issue that came up between CNN and Donald Trump and, of course, access to the White House. Jim Acosta's access, of course, being revoked. I wanted to play another clip from the same press conference that we played a clip for earlier. And this time, this is a PBS journalist and her exchange with Donald Trump. Let's watch that.
Yami Shalcender with PBS NewsHour. On the campaign trail, you called yourself a nationalist. Some people saw that as emboldening white nationalists. Now people are also
I don't
saying
know why you'd
that
say
the
that. That's such a racist
There are
question.
some people that say that now the Republican Party is seen as supporting white nationalists
I
because
don't
of your
believe
rhetoric.
that. I don't
What do you
believe
make of that?
I don't believe it. I don't know. Why do I have my highest poll numbers ever with African Americans? Why do I have among the highest poll numbers with African Americans? I mean, why do I have my highest poll numbers? That's such a racist question. Honestly, I mean, I know you have it written down and you're going to tell me. Let me tell you, it's a racist question.
And Mr. President, I want to
love
ask
it. You know what the word is? I love our country. I do. You have nationalists, you have globalists. I also love the world. And I don't mind helping the world, but we have to straighten out our country first. We have a lot of problems.
And Ms.
Excuse me, but to say that, what you said, is so insulting to me. It's a very terrible thing that you said.
And Mr.
Okay,
President,
please, go ahead.
Mr. President,
Go ahead.
people have you
Go
talked
ahead.
about you talked about middle class tax cuts on the campaign trail. How will you get Democrats to support that policy?
You have to ask them.
Well,
Hey,
what's your plan for
excuse
working
me.
with
You know
Democrats
how
on a
my
middle
plan
class
is?
tax plan?
You know what my plan is? I'll ask them. And if they say yes, I'm all for it. And if they say no, there's nothing you can do because you need their votes. Go ahead.
All right, that was another clip from that same press conference that I mentioned, of course, earlier. Let's discuss that press conference again and all the related issues. We're joined this time by Mr. Mubashir Zaidi, who is a senior journalist, and he's joining us now on the line. Mubashir, thanks very much for joining us here on The Scope. Mubashir, I wonder what you make of Trump attacking that PBS journalist this time for what he termed a racist question.
Well, I think, first of all, the CNN restoration of the access to White House is a major embarrassment for President Trump. And as we had seen Mr. Acosta coming out yesterday and talking to the press saying that, he's back at work and he is glad that rule of law has prevailed. But
Yeah.
it seems that President Trump is refusing to learn. His interaction with media are normally very crude, He misbehaves a lot of the time and try to ridicule them. But this will eventually backfire. It has already backfiring. He's got major embarrassment in case of the CNN reporter.
Yeah.
But now even President Trump's own sympathetic networks like Fox is now supporting CNN on the issue. I think President Trump is taking it too far. And in case of the media, I think he has to push back a bit, if he at all intends to. But whatever has happened so far now, it seems that he's not learning from his lesson.
Why do you think it is that angers Donald Trump so much?
Well, because Donald Trump has come with the support of extreme right-wing white supremacist groups.
Yeah.
So it's logical that if he's questioned about them and whether he intends to stop them, their rhetoric, so he was bound to hit back at press. But U.S., in the past, having been a society that is supposed to be flag bearers of human rights and press freedoms, is the society itself is finding it very difficult to digest the new face of the U.S. administration, which is very, very rigid, which is against the freedom of expression, which is trying to curb the freedoms there, whether it's about the immigrants or even about the ordinary U.S. citizens. So I think this is a hard time for both the administration as well as for the media, because President Trump, it seems that his tirade is not going to stop anytime soon, and he would continue to hit back at press whenever they criticize him. And that's the kind of a personality he has. So now what we are seeing is that the press and the media in the United States is joining hands, whether they are the right-wing TV channels or the right-wing publications or the left-wing publications and left-wing channels, because they are sensing that this is not going to stop at CNN or New York Times. It's going to get further difficult for the press to critique the president. And the president, they know, doesn't like it, and
Right.
that's when the press also wants to take advantage of him by asking questions that would instantly infuriate him, and he would make fun of himself in the press conferences. Now, in all major journalism schools worldwide, his videos of challenging the media personnel or ridiculing them are being shown as the examples of how the media landscape is changing in United States, which once was the flag bearer of freedom of expression.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it brings me to our next question, Mubashir. And I don't want to attack CNN, but I want to use it as a case study, if we may, because both you and I are journalists, and I imagine that you and I both would look at the situation and ask, what would we do differently, or would we do anything differently? So I'm wondering, in the case of CNN, do you think that as a network it has been unfair to Donald Trump? Do you think that Jim Acosta made any mistakes in that press conference that warranted any sort of such reaction by Donald Trump?
Well, I think reporters tend to ask too many questions at one point in time, if you can just go by the textbook. And that's when the first question he asked, and the president got offended.
Yeah.
So he tried to ask follow-up questions, and president was not in a mood to give him any chance of this sort.
Right.
So that's where the press realizes that now in our journalistic studies or trainings, we are being told that if you want to take out something really startling from a leader, there are two ways of doing it. Either you make him angry, and out of anger, he would spill the beans about a certain issue that you would want him to or her to spell out, or be very, very polite and try to trap him or her into the things that you actually want to know. As we know that media has the information. All they need is someone to say it. And coming from a president, obviously, who is not averse to making controversies.
Yeah.
So press is having a great time over there. They know that every time they'll be asking questions to the president, something will come out from his mouth that is going to make news. So every reporter there tries to carve their questions in a manner that infuriates the president, except for obviously the official media like Associated Press or other news agencies or
Right.
the groups that are sympathetic to president. They wouldn't do that. But if when President Trump came into power, I still remember that he put his finger towards the CNN representative and said that you are fake news.
Yeah.
So, and he said it in terms of New York Times or other news outlets as well. They're not going to
Right.
forget that, and
Yeah.
they're going to get back at the president, and they know that he's vulnerable. He tends to say things which are not very presidential, which are not very civilized.
Yeah.
So they know that every time you ask a pointed question or an aggressive question towards the president, he's going to react strongly, and that is what's going to make news. So reporters are having a ball at the White House briefing.
You know, another issue, Mubashir, which Donald Trump brings up often and has been spoken about often now throughout, in fact, the 2016 elections, in fact, even during these midterm elections in the United States, was the issue of fake news. And Donald Trump has said, for example, as you correctly pointed out, that he has accused CNN of being fake news. But we have seen in the past that, especially when it comes to the Russia collusion issue, there have been accusations, even by Facebook and other such social media outlets, that there is fake news out there. So in such an atmosphere where there is now seemingly some sort of distrust between the media and the people, what do you think this ongoing battle between the media in the US and the President of the United States, what does that mean? This just creates more divisions, doesn't it?
Well, I think, yes, it has indeed already made a division, because when President Trump came into power, his election campaign was all about fake news. There were outlets that had come up by faking up stories. We all knew that there was a news outlet, a bunch of people who claimed to have earned millions of dollars through the news that would embarrass Hillary Clinton in that manner, or other things. So I think this is what the presidential campaign started itself, by putting fake news to malign Hillary Clinton and her campaign. And we had seen that. Now, obviously, as we say, that it's karma now. It's coming back to haunt the same president who had once used the weapon of fake news against his opponents. So now, yes, indeed, fake news is a problem worldwide, and because of the social media, it has multiplied the problem multifold by disseminating information that is often wrong, that is manipulated, that is represented out of context. All these things are happening. So that is why we have seen, Facebook or Twitter or other social media outlets now taking steps to counter fake news. But I think it's easier said than done, because the fake news phenomenon is so prevalent now that people somehow tend to believe on everything that they see on the wall of their Facebook page or their Twitter handle or other stories. So what we need now is more outlets which could actually aware the people about the fake news phenomenon and give them examples of the fake news that have been spreading all across the world. So, and we have seen certain news outlets in US or even next door India who are working to counter the menace of fake news. But it's very, very hard to do that. Like in a country like Pakistan, where we have very limited access to information for whatever reasons. This phenomenon of fake news is going to sort of, create problems.
So I'm wondering, at this point, when we condemn the Trump administration, or as journalists condemn the Trump administration, Mubashir, I wonder, do you think that we have been unfair to Donald Trump? Do you think that we have not respected the fact that, or as he says, that he has been democratically elected? As you said, of course, he has his voter base. We can, of course, have a debate about popular vote versus electoral college vote. All those debates exist. But the fact is, he is the president of the United States. Do you think that the media needs to accept that and move on, in a sense, instead of just concentrating on the man himself?
Well, I think media would have done that had President himself not initiated to this thing to start ridiculing press. Right from his first press conference till now, he has constantly been ridiculing press in his tweets, in his press conferences, in his interviews. So I think that has what has angered the press, that, yes, you are a president, we accept you as a president, but by sort of creating, by asking, or by alleging several news outlets which are respected worldwide, like New York Times or CNN, that you are fake news. He has begun this war, which is going to, be very nasty in days to come. Has already turned very nasty. But going forward, obviously, he himself has created this division between him and certain news outlets who are now, obviously, for any news outlet to be opposing the regime of the day is going to get eyeballs in terms of the websites or television channels or the newspapers. It's a worldwide accepted phenomenon that if you're going against the regime, people love you for that. They watch you to get an understanding of how the government is doing wrong. So similarly, I think New York Times, as President himself said, that had reduced circulation, but New York Times came up with a figure saying that they have now more subscribers. They are getting more eyeballs on their digital outlet. Yeah. Same is the claim for CNN, that their ratings have gone up. Yeah. So I think it's an ongoing battle, and it hasn't started by the media. It has started by the president himself. So it'll be very difficult that you can ask the media to just stop it and don't come out and start to target the president, continue targeting the president, when president is not stopping his tirade against the media.
Okay, Mubashir, we're just going to take a very short break. Before going into this break, I just wanted to sum up something that Mubashir there mentioned, which is very important, and that is, of course, the fact that this is almost karma. Donald Trump has attacked the media as candidate and as president from day one. And that is a conversation which is very important to happen, that is this something that he's created himself? Is this an atmosphere that the US president himself created, where there is so much now animosity between the press and the White House? Mubashir, do stay with us. We'll be back after a short break. Thank you for staying with us. We're still in the scope. I'm Waqar Rizvi, and we're in discussion with Mubashir Zaidi, who is a senior journalist, and he's joining us on the line. Before we go back to Mubashir, if we have that clip, I'd like to play a third clip that we have prepared for you, and this is a shorter one, but it's Donald Trump speaking in some terms, as you'll see, about decorum on the part of the press in the White House. Let's watch that clip if we can.
Watch her get up. I mean, you talk about somebody that's a loser. She doesn't know what the hell she's doing. She gets publicity, and then she gets a pay raise, or she gets a contract with, I think, CNN. But she's very nasty, and she shouldn't be. She shouldn't be. You've got to treat the White House and the office of the presidency with respect.
All right, so that's an important clip, isn't it, Mubashir? Because one can make the argument, as you did, Mubashir, earlier as well, that yes, even if the president possibly created this atmosphere of animosity, it's irresponsible, isn't it, of certain press sometimes to create or to seek sensationalist news
Well, partly yes, it is. We all know, but somehow the competition has gone so cutthroat that organizations, news organizations, want to cash it on a controversy, on an ongoing controversy, and they try to instigate some sort of controversy if there isn't one by asking some difficult questions. And they know that President Trump is vulnerable. So whatever they ask, he's going to respond in a manner which is going to make news for that person, that news outlet that he's representing. So I think it's just, I agree with you that sensationalism is bad, but then sensationalism sells. And we have seen the British media, they've been very sensationalist, except for the BBC, which is obviously a state-owned organization. So, but the rest of the British publications, or we have seen the issue of the News of the World, that how far the media had gone in terms of getting the news, which they had violated the law. So in case of American media, which is obviously very loud, and people love this loudness of the American media. Yeah. So I think CNN and New York Times both are cashing it on. They know that the more they write against the Trump, the more he'll get infuriated, the more they get the news out of this, and their thing sells. And unfortunately, as you mentioned earlier as well, that if the fake news can sell like wildfire, so sensationalist news can also sell. It's very unfortunate. It's not textbook journalism, but this is a reality in 2018.
You know, another issue, Mubashir, which comes up in this conversation, it's a related issue, is that of political correctness. Who says that a president has to always be politically correct? One of the things about Trump that many people like is the fact that he's honest. He's not being a lifelong politician. He was a businessman who has now become the president of the United States. We've had other leaders around the world. We can probably mention Hugo Chavez, who was not politically correct. He was very loud and he would speak his mind. We had Mahmoud Ahmadinejad of Iran, who spoke his mind. He was not politically correct either. Where do you stand in this debate about political correctness? And do you think that possibly the standards and our measure of what we accept as offensive or not offensive has become a bit weak?
Well, I think we have to, if you see a larger picture, U.S. is losing its influence over world affairs. They desperately need to cash it on. Look at what happened in the case of Jamal Khashoggi. America first tried to save the Saudis by saying, things that, they haven't done anything and things like these. They wholeheartedly backed Saudi Arabia. But then Turkey almost demolished that narrative of the U.S. by coming out with some sort of an evidence that he was killed. And you has had to backtrack. If not backtrack, they have to deviate from the stated policy statement. And now they're saying that they believe, the latest that had come is that CIA believes that the orders were given by the Saudi prince to kill Jamal Khashoggi. So I think U.S. is finding as a state very difficult now on the world issues. So that's why President Trump is trying to be aggressive, trying to make statements that to stay relevant to a sort we have seen in terms of Arab Spring, that when it came to Syria, how Russia dominated the narrative, how in case of the Gulf, how Qatar had dominated by getting support from Turkey, China, and other countries. So I think the world is changing. In this changing world, President Trump is trying to stay relevant, or trying to make his country stay on top of things. But now they are making mistakes because there are other now big players like Russia and China who are dominating the diplomacy, dominating the world policies, and dominating in terms of their power.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned diplomacy there, Mubashir, because that's another point. There's a narrative, of course, that Donald Trump represents somebody who is anti-establishment. Many people say that is why his voter base supports him so much, because he represents somebody who thinks outside the box, as we may say. We may not like him. He may be very harsh. He may be, again, politically incorrect. But, for example, even his outreach to North Korea were something that the U.S. establishment, even Republicans, in fact, many of them have not supported. It seems almost sometimes, Mubashir, from his point of view, of course, and from that narrative's point of view, that it's almost like Donald Trump can do nothing right. Do you feel that there's, I don't want to use the word conspiracy, but do you think that there's a concerted effort to make even positive things that he does look bad?
Well, first of all, I don't buy this argument that he's anti-establishment. I think he is the establishment, or the establishment brought him to power, and you can see the foreign policy is majorly now run with the help of retired generals and Pentagon to an extent. So I think if you see all these things, I think U.S. during the Obama time started to lose its dominance of the world politics, and that's where the establishment in U.S. decided to install a president who is a very outspoken person and who doesn't have an idea about world politics. He's a businessman, so the establishment can mold them towards issues that they want to. So we have seen, you know, his overtures to North Korea and then turning back from them, and then going against to North Korea, then turning back. Things like these are interesting times. I mean, the world is changing. The world politics is changing. So I think President Trump is being used by the establishment to regain whatever U.S. has lost in the last 5 years or so by going towards aggressively on international issues. But it seems it's backfiring, whether it's Syria, whether it's Afghanistan, and whether it's the Khashoggi episode. We have seen, you know, other countries taking charge and creating some sort of an embarrassment for U.S. and the media, the mainstream media in U.S., which is somehow against President Trump, is using that opportunity as well to pin him down. So I think odds seem to be against the U.S. when it comes to world politics, and within U.S., I think the media will remain hostile to him.
You know, when we talk about Obama, if we may just for a second, Mubashir, during the Obama administration's era, it was said, of course, and he did quite obviously have a fairly good relationship with the media as a whole. Many people said his PR image was very good. He was a very charismatic man, certainly, when he was in the White House. But Obama administration also went after whistleblowers, for example, very harshly. It denied a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests for information about classified documents or otherwise. And as you and I well know, whistleblowers and this sort of access to behind-the-scenes information, which may even be classified, is vital in our industry. So why do you think it is that Obama, even now by much media, is remembered so fondly, even though actually, to media, he actually wasn't very good when it comes to the facts?
Well, I partially agree with you that Obama could not fulfill many of his promises that he made during the second tenure of his presidency. He initially also said when he came that, you know, they will get out of Afghanistan. So did President Trump, but they couldn't. They also went after, as you're saying, that first it was Julian Assange, and then against Edward Snowden, who were whistleblowers, who media thinks that did national service by whistleblowing the information that the U.S. regime wanted to hide from the people of the United States and the world in general. So, in that case, if you see that Obama, yes, in the second presidency, I think he was a disappointment because he wanted to close the Guantanamo Bay, but he couldn't. And then President Trump said the same thing. He couldn't. So I think there are lots of things that are backfiring for U.S. at the moment, and somehow giving opportunities to other countries, to U.S.'s rivals like Russia or China, to sort of give an impression that they are better in dealing with a controversy, with an international controversy that is cropping out of any crisis, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Syria, whether it's Khashoggi episode.
Yeah.
So I think President Trump needs to realize, if at all he would, I hardly doubted that he may ever will be, but at this time, I think he has to take a step back if he really wants the lessening of the press tirade against him, is that he should step back and does not respond angrily or aggressively to the questions that are being posed by the media, because media now knows that any critical question to President would anger him, would attract harsh response from him. So I think it's just something that President Trump has to realize. Although his economic policies are very good, he is taking the economy back to normalcy that was tarnished by the recession, the famous 2008 recession.
Yeah.
He has put U.S. back to certain economic stability, a rather very strong economic stability. But his issues with China, his dealings with China and with other world powers like European Union or even NATO to an extent, are very, very thorny. So he needs, if he at all U.S. wants to retain its dominance over world politics, he has to have some sort of a coordination with other world powers to take a consensus decision on world politics rather than taking up his own decision.
Very well, Mubashir, we'll leave there at that. We'd, of course, appreciate you joining us in the scope here on Indus News and discussing this very important issue with us, sharing your thoughts with us on the line there. Mubashir Zaidi was speaking to us, senior journalist. It's important, isn't it, viewers, to take what Mubashir and even earlier our other guest, Mazhar, had said about media objectivity as a whole. We also, of course, have to talk about the responsibility of the media. And it's not lost upon us, of course, that we're coming to you from Pakistan and we're coming to you from outside the United States. And this is not an attack on the United States specifically, but just we're trying to gain lessons as journalists looking at all of these events that are happening vis-a-vis the media around the world, not just in the US, and to, of course, try to fulfill our jobs to get the information to you in as objective a manner as possible. We'll leave it there for now for this time. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Waqar Rizvi, your host.